Alright, here's our girl. Today is her 16th birthday. Oh, what a lovely age, right? Perfect for being told you're getting married. Wait, what? Yes, as you heard it, before they even finish singing happy birthday, they tell her, look, honey, this guy who barely talks will be your future husband and will now live with us. Obviously, the waifu is in shock, but don't worry, because these folks have a history together, except the waifu, for some strange reason, lost her memory and now has to remember what happened. But wait, a bit of context. The anime begins by introducing us to a waifu who was having a strange dream where she meets a guy. Maybe it was a memory or a premonition of what was about to happen to her. She is our protagonist, Kobini. When she wakes up, she goes downstairs, and her sister Binio is waiting with a birthday cake. She celebrates with her, and the waifu says some heartfelt words that almost make her cry. She evidently cared a lot about her sister. On the other hand, their mother was a bit more reserved with her feelings, but still congratulates her on her birthday, and also tells her that she must fulfill the engagement left by her grandfather. So, she introduces Hakuya, who had been watching the two talk for a while, or rather, watching Kobini reject him, although that didn't seem to bother him much, and thanks to that attitude, the waifu got even more upset because they didn't even know each other. Later, their little sister Mashiro knocks on the door. This tiny one says she will also live with them to protect her brother and teach Kobini how to treat him. Yes, folks, this tiny one is small but dangerous. But while the waifu processed everything that was happening on her birthday, she realized that if she was going to live with two more people, she would have to buy more food. Just as she goes out to do that, luckily the main guy goes with her to help her avoid getting a big beatdown as she leaves the house. Although, well, he was also very clumsy, although he wanted to help her with the bags and take care of her. While the lovebirds are shopping, their little sister starts looking for any nonsense in the house to annoy Kobini. But the loli didn't expect her sister to be watching her and tells her that if she wants to make her life impossible, she will do the same to her. Later, the guys come home and the waifu starts cooking. When the little one approaches and sees that she was making her favorite food, she is very happy, but it wasn't what she expected. It was too spicy for her, so she asks how she prefers it. Since they were going to start living together and she was the one who cooked, she didn't want to make them feel bad. Little by little, she wants to win over her sister-in-law, who by the way came from a small town, and just by seeing the waifu's TV, she was like she had seen God in person. The next day, classes began, and while the protagonist was on her way to school with the guy, she began to worry that everyone would find out about her engagement to him. Although, well, that didn't go very well because her friend Mayura heard them talking, and then the guy introduced himself as her fiancé. After this, the waifu asks her friend not to tell anyone else in class. And well, when they arrive at school, she sees that the little one finished the paperwork and managed to get the emo and her in the same classroom as her. So she went out with her for a moment to tell her to stop annoying her. She should be in daycare or something, but the little one tells her not to underestimate the influences her family has. Then, their older sister Binio arrives. Apparently, she was the most popular in school, but the little one didn't think so. She didn't even understand why everyone praised her so much, and to her misfortune, the class representative took notice of her, which surprised everyone, especially the little one who had to run away. The waifu was popular because she excelled in all subjects in addition to her personality, and this was uncomfortable for the protagonist because she was always compared to her, and when the emo realized that it bothered her, he tries to console her. At the same time, since the little one seemed like a koala with the guy, she takes the opportunity to tell her not to resist Binio, otherwise she will continue to annoy her. The next day, we see the dwarf complaining because she can't believe her sister is so popular at school, but since she knows she's a very childish loli, she tries to make her feel better and offers her some candy, although she wasn't as naive as she thought, and she runs away. Conquering her wasn't going to be an easy task for her. Later, at dinner, the dwarf starts talking about the time Kobini visited their hometown, although she didn't remember everything clearly, so her little sister tries to tell her everything that had happened, but the emo tells her no, it's better for all that to remain in the past. After this, they talk alone, and the waifu asks him why he doesn't want Kobini to know that he saved her when they were kids, because if he told her everything, the waifu would probably fall in love with him faster, but he tells her that forgetting was for a reason and it was better to leave things that way. He didn't want her to marry him thinking she owes him something like that. On the other hand, the protagonist, while in the living room reading a book, began to think about what happened years ago when they were kids, and also what happened at dinner, so not to stay with doubts, she is going to ask the dwarf. But the loli had just seen an alien program on TV and was quite traumatized, since in her hometown they had never heard anything about those things, and well, thanks to this the waifu couldn't ask her anything. Later, she couldn't fall asleep from thinking about it so much, and when she finally managed to fall asleep, she has a dream where she visited a giant house in the middle of the mountains, where she also saw the figure of a cat. But just when things were getting interesting, the waifu wakes up. The next day, the protagonist asks Mashiro about the matter, but the dwarf doesn't tell her anything, and she was still scared thinking she was going to be kidnapped by aliens at any moment. So much so that when her brother barely speaks to her, she runs away scared and ends up giving herself a huge bruise for being silly. Upon arriving at school, the waifus heal her knees, and while they are talking, Binio approaches and finds out that she is afraid of aliens, which made her even more interested in her, as she seemed more childish than she expected. On the other hand, the dwarf can't believe how she has everyone on her side, terrified, and since she was scared about aliens, she thinks she was one of them and was brainwashing everyone at school. However, the waifus show her all the things Binio had achieved, so she would understand that it wasn't as crazy as what she was inventing, but that only increases her suspicions towards her, as she didn't expect anyone could be so perfect. And well, as the waifu was listening to everything she thought of her, she tells her not to worry about that. She just wanted to be a good older sister, and also wanted her to be her new little sister, so she could treat her like Kobini. At that moment, Kashima, the vice president of the council, arrives and gives Binio a good scolding to stop bothering the dwarf. After they leave, Miura asks her where they were living, and the loli tells her at Kobini's house, which makes the waifu upset and tells her not to say those things so no one else finds out. But the silly girl says that wasn't a secret and starts shouting it. Thanks to that, everyone finds out. Luckily, she didn't say they were engaged. The next day, their mother joins them for breakfast, where the old lady asks the protagonist what he likes to eat, but then Binio, besides playing with the dwarf, joins the conversation and tells her that her sister already knew everything he liked, which made her uncomfortable because they really seem like a married couple. Later at school, we see that the waifu wasn't very excited because they had sports classes, and she wasn't very good at it due to the two good reasons she had. At the same time, she kept thinking it was very uncomfortable being with a fiancé she knows nothing about. At the same time, while the dwarf talks to Mayura, she realizes she was good at many things, household chores, school subjects, and she was also very cute. The waifu was as popular as her sister and hadn't even realized it. That's when the dwarf realized Binio could become a threat to her brother's commitment in case she gets jealous. What an imagination the loli has. Although there have been cases, after classes, the dwarf talks to her brother and tells him to step up his game with the waifu, because as popular as she was at school, someone could snatch her away. Then, Binio arrives to invite her to have tea and eat sweets in the council room, but as expected, the dwarf leaves her on red, unlike the vice president, who says yes when she invites her. On the other hand, the protagonists return home alone, although they had to stop by the supermarket to buy a few things. When they get there, they see a mess of people because there was a discount on meat and, well, everyone was taking advantage of it, so the protagonist didn't miss out on that deal either. Meanwhile, the waifu bought some cups for the two of them. After all, they were already part of the family. When they get home, the dwarf thanks her for the gift and tells the emo to thank her too, but since the guy had his mind on another planet, he thanks his mother instead. Good move. This way, the weekend arrives and we see that the protagonist receives a letter from his father, asking how everything was going. The dwarf, all scared, answers and tells her brother to deliver the letter for her. While that was happening, the sisters were washing and hanging clothes in the yard. There they realized that the dwarf's underwear looked like a baby's, and the dwarf found out that Binio saw it, so she was so embarrassed that she started crying. To calm her down, the protagonist had to prepare her something to eat. There they realized that the protagonist wasn't home. Taking advantage of the moment, she went to ask about her fiancé, and her sister tells her about when she visited the protagonist's house. There the guy saved her life, and for that reason she wasn't against their engagement. The guy was a good person, besides it was their grandfather's orders, and well, thanks to this the waifu feels guilty for forgetting something so important. The next day, the waifu wakes up sick. When she tries to get out of bed and looks at her legs, they feel like they've been hit hard by something, so she decides to stay resting. Meanwhile, the little one asks her sister why she had said what she did, and she tells her it's because she feels guilty about the accident. She was supposed to accompany their grandfather, but she went out with her friends instead, so she asked her sister to cover for her, and that's when it happened. Just then, Kobini arrives, having overheard their conversation. She tells her not to feel guilty about what happened, but as she tries to get up from bed, she faints again. At the same time, we see that Binio was terrible at cooking. The poor little one finally started to appreciate Kobini. You know how they say, you don't know what you've got until it's gone, so she had no choice but to eat whatever it was until she recovered and could cook again. The next day, the waifu was still unwell and misses school again. The guy says he wants to stay with her to take care of her, but because of that, her sister says she can't leave two teenagers alone with their hormones in a frenzy. She says she'll do it instead, but in the end, nobody stays because the protagonist gets annoyed with her sister for making a big deal out of it and tells everyone to go to class, so that's what they do, although they say they'll come back as soon as possible. When they return, they continue taking care of her. While the little one was with her, she remembers the scar she got from the accident she had, and the waifu tells her that her brother didn't have one, which at least made her a little happier, although she still felt guilty for getting hurt while saving her. The next day, the waifu couldn't even look the guy in the eye because she was so embarrassed. Because of this, the guy thinks she's mad at him and runs off. The waifu follows him and tells him it's not his fault. On the contrary, he saved her, and she wants to thank him for that. With that said, they make up in their own way and go to school. On the other hand, Binio was angry because she knew the two had a romantic moment and the idea of losing her Anakin. On the other hand, the protagonist tells her friend everything that's going on with the guy, and her friend tells her they're meant for each other. She also tries to help her conquer him, so she goes and asks him what he likes, and in front of her, he says he likes Kobini. Later at home, the siblings receive a letter saying someone from their village is coming to see how things are going with them. The next day, Binio gives the little one a very cute pajama, which makes her angry because she still treated her like a child, although she kind of liked it because she ended up wearing it. At the same time, they take the opportunity to tell Kobini that a relative of theirs will be visiting their house. This makes the waifu nervous, thinking about what to cook, how to behave, and things like that. At that moment, the guy reminds her that they have exams the next day, which makes her even more nervous than she already was. But the guy tries to console her by patting her head. The next day, after taking the exams, they go out to eat something. When the guy compliments Kobini's cooking in front of her sister, she gets annoyed with him again, seeing that they were getting along better and better. On the other hand, we see a waifu in a kimono arriving in the city. She was responsible for watching over the siblings, but ends up getting lost in the city. Luckily, she meets the protagonist who was just coming back from shopping with lots of bags. Seeing this, Kobini offers to help her. After talking for a bit, they realize they are heading in the same direction. When they arrive, the waifu introduces herself as the mother of the boys, named Shirayuki. The protagonist is surprised because she was practically the same size as Mashiro and still managed to have 2 children. But with the intention of helping her sister, Binio helps prepare tea so she can properly entertain her future mother-in-law. The lady was happy that someone as good as her would be with her son, as they needed to uphold the lineage. She also mentions that during the accident they had years ago, the guy had to use his powers to save her. The little one says she didn't know anything about that, and the old lady keeps talking, saying that they are not humans. They are a species that can transform into dogs. Twilight, okay, not really. After this revelation, the protagonist has some small memories of something similar, and with so much thinking, plus the news from the old lady, she faints again and falls unconscious. There, the lady confirms what she was suspecting. It turns out the guy shared half of his powers with her to save her. Luckily, the symptoms she was experiencing passed while sleeping. With all this said, and after all the commotion, the lady returns home. But before leaving, she asks her sister not to say anything about this, although logically, almost no one would believe her if she starts talking too much. And to make the protagonist believe her completely, before leaving, she shows her that her powers were real and tells her that the guy likes to pat her head in the morning because she did the same when she first met him and he liked. The next day, Binio prepares breakfast to help her sister, and thankfully, this time, they were actually edible. While they eat, the main character asks her little sister if they could freely transform into furries. She tells her that others could, but it wasn't like how she might imagine with ears and tails like a cosplayer. With this said, the waifu was even more interested in the protagonist's transformation, but he says he prefers not to do it. When they arrive at school, they receive their exam grades. Everyone is surprised to see the protagonist got first place, unlike his sister who got last place, although she had never been to school before. As she's not a normal human, they only attend to blend in with humans, but despite finishing last, she managed to pass, so the protagonist congratulates her. Later, we find out it's Valentine's Day, and the waifu plans to do something for her fiancé, even though he doesn't like sweets. Her little sister suggests giving him chocolates to find out his favorite, but she should better ask him. When she goes to ask, she finds him fast asleep in the classroom, so she takes the opportunity to stroke his head, which startles him awake, and he accidentally slaps her. Meanwhile, Binio continues to pester her sister because her brother took Kobini away, and she wants her to take his place, but the loli makes it difficult for her. Later, after school, they go to a store to find chocolates he might like, and her sister buys a bunch that come with dinosaur figurines, but she's unlucky because she gets the one dinosaur he likes the least. At the same time, the protagonist starts thinking more about their engagement and compares herself to her mother and sister. Her mother had a good job, and her sister was very pretty, so she feels somewhat insecure about it. The next day, Kobini has the gift ready for her furry, but she's waiting for the right moment to give it to him. When they finally have a moment alone on the school terrace, surrounded by couples making romantic gestures, she hesitates, runs off, and poor dog ends up in the friend zone. So, feeling heartbroken, he sits in a park, hoping his waifu would give him something, and when he angrily arrives home, the little sister notices something had happened. But at that moment, Mayura also arrives with a bunch of leftover dinosaur chocolates, telling the protagonist that Kobini was looking for the right moment to give him some chocolates, and thanks to her help, the waifu gathers the courage to give them to him. And well, while he was happy with his gift, Binio and her sister were causing chaos throughout the house due to their jealousy. In a change of scene, we meet the council secretary named Konoha. This waifu felt jealous of the short girl because she admired Binio. This admiration stemmed from the fact that the waifu had helped her, and from that moment, she became a sort of goddess to her. So much so that she enrolled in the same school as the waifu. However, when she found out that Binio had a younger sister, she was deeply disappointed. Although she accepted it because it was her family, she couldn't feel the same way about the short girl. On the other hand, we meet Nico, a friend of Konoha. Nico suggests investigating the short girl since Konoha showed so much interest in her. Konoha agrees and asks asks Nico to find something to blackmail her with. While Nico plays detective, spying on the waifus, the protagonist catches her and asks her to stop. He takes her camera and deletes the photos she had taken. When Konoha hears about this, she feels attracted to the protagonist because of how protective he is of his waifus. Later, we learn that the emo boy failed his math exam and had to take another test to improve his grades. Because of this, Mayura and Kobini meet with him in the library to help him study. In the middle of this, the short girl goes to the bathroom and runs out scared because the two crazy girls were watching her, and she thought they were ghosts or something. The next day, the protagonist asks the short girl how she passed the exam while her brother didn't. It turns out the lowly cheated using hypnosis, something her brother could also do, but unlike his sister, he preferred to do things correctly and wanted to pass without cheating. Meanwhile, we see Konoha worried because she thought the protagonist would tell about the scene where she was really angry while chasing the short girl. In her rage, she shouts in the hallway that she wishes she were the short girl so Binio would treat her the same way. Additionally, hearing that the short girl was always speaking ill of her goddess, she confronts her outside the school. When she gets close, she realizes that the short girl lived in the mountains because of her scent. Nevertheless, she tells her to respect Binio more. However, what Konoha didn't know was that the short girl was suffering because of her. After the waifu leaves, the short girl tells the protagonist that Konoha had a strong sense of smell, so she was of the same species as them. The blonde also realized they were just like her. The next day, the protagonist reflects on what the short girl told her about the blonde and decides it's best to keep their discovery a secret. This is because the blonde was on the council with her sister, and just as she thought about it, she realized they were hiding something from her. So, she started playing her games, but they still didn't tell her anything. Later at school, the blonde keeps wondering how the protagonist and her little sister ended up living with Binio. To calm her down, Nico gave her a bunch of photos of her goddess so she wouldn't overthink things. On the other hand, Binio was very worried, thinking her sister no longer loved her, and that's why she wasn't telling her anything. This made her paranoid, imagining all sorts of things about what wasn't being said to her. Yes, folks, the poor girl was very intrigued. When the weekend arrives, the kids go to the mall. They visit a food store, but the protagonist isn't thrilled with the idea because she thinks she might gain weight if she overeats. So, she gives half of her food to the furry character, which leads to a misunderstanding, making people think they are dating because it was such a sweet gesture. After this, they go to buy some clothes. We see that Kobini has quite large hips because she struggles to fit into a pair of pants. Instead of feeling proud of her figure, she gets upset. Meanwhile, Nico, playing detective again, thinks this is important and starts taking notes. The protagonist catches her once more and scolds her, and everyone notices they were talking about her. So, the waifu leaves for the moment, although she doesn't plan to give up easily. The next day, the blonde seeks to speak with the short girl in private. They head to the rooftop, making quite a scene while climbing up. Binio notices and thinks the two are fighting over her, so she tries to spy on them, but the other waifu stops her from being nosy. When they get to the rooftop, the pair of fools can't even talk because of the cold, so they end up going back down to talk behind the gym. Meanwhile, the protagonist thinks they've been gone too long and goes to see where they went. Back with the Lolas, the blonde tells the short girl that it's not right to deceive Binio by living with her when she's of another species. The short girl starts crying, feeling insulted by this, as she isn't in that house because of Binio. At that moment, her brother arrives to console her. The blonde then says she heard a rumor about the men of their species and, because of this, asks him to marry her without a second thought. Wait, what? Yes, the blonde went full random. Kobini, who was listening to everything, didn't seem to like that last part. Knowing that what she was doing wasn't right, she tries to leave without anyone noticing, but it goes the opposite way because she trips and, well, when everyone sees her, she runs off very embarrassed. The furry character tries to follow her, but the blonde doesn't want to let her future husband go. This blonde wants everyone for herself. The short girl tells her that he's engaged to the protagonist to get her to stop being annoying. Hearing this leaves the blonde paralyzed, as she didn't expect something like that and certainly didn't know what to do with a rival in love. Meanwhile, the emo boy catches up with the waifu and tells her that the blonde's proposal means nothing to him. He only wants to marry her and no one else. At that moment, the nosy Nico overhears what he's saying and asks if they're dating. Remembering that the waifu forbade him from talking about it, he seriously tells her that they're not dating. The waifu leaves, but Kobini is a bit upset by what the protagonist said. He only did what she asked. This is when she realizes she's starting to like him. After this, Nico goes to gossip and tells the blonde that the two aren't in any kind of relationship, which excites her because she thinks this means she has a chance with the guy, or at least that's what she thinks. The next day, the blonde meets up with the kids and tells Kobini that she doesn't plan to give up on the furry character, but Kobini only asks her not to mention anything about her engagement to the protagonist at school. Additionally, the short girl comes up with a plan B to help her, which involves taking pictures of Binio and giving them them to the blonde to shut her up, but that doesn't go very well. Back with the girls, the blonde tells Kobeni that she didn't plan to say anything about the engagement. At the same time, she says that Kobeni doesn't seem enthusiastic about marrying him, so she should friend-zone him to avoid breaking his heart later. This makes the protagonist cry because she thinks she's really hurting the furry character. Just as she's about to respond, Binio arrives to find out what's going on, but the waifu tells her she just got something in her eye. Since Binio isn't one to exaggerate, she says she'll shut down the whole school to prevent it from happening again. Later, when the lovebirds get home, the waifu tells the protagonist that the reason she doesn't want anyone to know about their engagement is because of the teasing it could cause, not because she doesn't want to marry him. But since the guy is slower than me, the short girl speaks clearly and tells him that what Kobeni was trying to say is that she is also in love with him. She advises him to give her a gift as a token of his love. The next day, we see Binio full of jealousy over what she heard the short girl say yesterday. The thought that the engagement between them was becoming more serious made her very angry. On the other hand, the furry character didn't care at all, which made her even more upset, to the point of making a scene before leaving. Kobeni doesn't understand why Binio is acting this way since she already knew about the engagement. The short girl tells her it's because she confessed that she likes the guy, but Kobeni tries to set things straight and says she never said that. However, the truth is that her sister is upset because of what happened the previous day. While walking to school, the short girl tells the furry character to think carefully about what to gift the protagonist. When they arrive at school, the waifu talks to the blonde again to ask if she really plans to marry the protagonist, but she doesn't like being the center of attention like her sister. So, she asks her not to write anything about her in the school newspaper. Although at first, the blonde doesn't take it well, she realizes it wasn't about her but because she was friends with Nico, who is very nosy. After school, the lovebirds walk home alone, thanks to the help of Mayura and the short girl. Just as they're leaving, Binio sees them and jumps from the second floor, very angry, to stop them. But the short girl arrives and tells her to stop bothering them. All the efforts she made to get them alone were being ruined. Hearing this, the protagonist gets mad at both of them because she doesn't like being watched. The next day, the protagonist goes out to buy a gift for his waifu. He spends practically the whole day looking but can't find something that convinces him. When he's about to give up, he runs into the waifu and she gives him a handkerchief. The cute thing is that she has an identical one, making them match as a couple. The guy is delighted with the gift but feels a bit down when he sees that she also gives one to her sister and the short girl. Seeing him a bit discouraged, the loli tells him not to give up and that he should give her a better gift to show his feelings. The next day, the short girl kept reminding him, and the poor furry was even more pressured. So much so that while he was at school, Mayura noticed something was wrong because he was more serious than usual. She tried to advise him, but ended up confusing him even more. After this, the kids walked home alone again, but this time they didn't have much to talk about. So, the waifu asked if his hairstyle bothered him since it covered one of his eyes. He told her it was to hide the Sharingan. Nah, just kidding, he said he was just used to it. On the other hand, the short girl had gone to buy more dinosaur chocolates, but since she was too lazy to walk back home normally, she started jumping across rooftops. While doing that, the nosy Nico almost discovered her. Luckily, she didn't recognize her, but her brother scolded her because if someone else found out her true identity, they would be forced to return to their village. Because of this, Nico became obsessed with what she saw and told the blonde that she wanted to keep investigating. Since the blonde was also one of them, she tried to stop her, but the waifu was already lost in her own world. She ran into the furry and told him she would stop investigating to leave her alone, but the protagonist, having no clue what she was talking about, thought the protagonist wasn't good enough for her. Speaking of her, he met her in the hallway after Nico left. The blonde saw them together and got so jealous that she told him she wasn't really in love with him and would stop being a nuisance for both of them. The son of a gun didn't care. Instead, he was happy because she wouldn't be a bother anymore. But luckily, the short girl arrived and changed the subject since she had the perfect gift for her. She suggested they go on a date. They both agreed, and the waifu also invited the short girl because she knew she wanted to be with them, although the only one who wasn't okay with all this was Binio. But fortunately, her friend took her away to leave them alone. That way, the kids had a different day and had a lot of fun. But on their way back, a strong breeze messed up the protagonist's hair for a moment. The waifu then noticed she had a scar and felt bad because she got it when she saved her life. But the guy told her it wasn't her fault, although that didn't make things much better. While she was cooking, she kept thinking about it all the time. While she was depressed thinking about it, the protagonist and the short girl received a letter from their family, which left them surprised. So much so that the next day when Kobeni went to wake them up for breakfast, she found they weren't in their room and their things were gone. The waifu had no idea why they left. The guy only left her a message saying they had returned to their village. However, her mother and Binio assured her they must have had a good reason for doing so and would surely be back soon, so she shouldn't worry too much. Since they were on vacation and didn't have to go to school for a while, the house felt very lonely. Mayura called her and she told her what happened, so the waifu suggested she go look for him. Taking her word, she went to find her crush. As she climbed the mountain, we see the furries calmly helping with the harvest because that was the real reason they left. But the guy heard her and ran to find her. Luckily, they found her quickly and they took refuge in a cave to wait out a storm. There, the short girl scolded him for not answering his messages and making her worried, but he had no signal. On top of that, the waifu got a fever and fainted again, so the emo ran to the village for help. The waifus were left alone, but the short girl had to go get more firewood to keep the fire from going out. The protagonist started having a kind of flashback where we see she had a very lonely childhood. Because of this, she thought the furries had abandoned her and went looking for them. When everyone returned to the cave, they realized Kobini was gone, so they split up and started searching for her. Meanwhile, the waifu had fainted again, but this time next to a snow cliff. Being on the edge, she fell into the void, but luckily, the protagonist arrived in an epic way and saved her once more. He then gave her some hot tea and carried her back to the village. There, the protagonist asked why he hid the scar, and the guy said he didn't want to worry her. But she didn't want any secrets between them, especially since they were engaged. So, the guy agreed and promised not to hide anything from her anymore. In a scene change, we see them returning home, and the vacation flies by as the kids start a new school year. Thanks to the short girl, they all end up in the same classroom again. We also see Kobini very happy because everything is back to normal, and to celebrate, she prepares dinner for all her family and friends. As always, the guy complimented her on how delicious her cooking was, but this time, the waifu seemed to enjoy it. This is how this anime ends. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a good like and comment the word engagement.